Hi, everyone.
Hi, Wes.
Thanks for giving me a few minutes to share with you. So I'm going to do, it's sort of an elevator pitch. It's like a 15-minute elevator pitch of my book. So if you're confused by the end of it and you want to know more, I brought a couple copies with me. I had to work really hard to sort of get things concise at a presentation I did last year. So this is good to remind myself that it doesn't take forever to explain something. So I want to tell you briefly kind of the starting point for the approach. Now this is just an idea. It's a model that could be used for thinking about renewal. It's not the only one. It's probably not even the best one, but it's one. But I pastored a small Quaker meeting in the Northwest called Camas Friends Church for the last 6 years before moving to North Carolina and working at Guilford. And our approach at Camas Friends, rather than sort of thinking about the weaknesses that we faced as a community or the problems that we faced, we focused very much on more of an appreciative inquiry model and thinking about what are the strengths, what's the life of this community, and telling those stories. So that's really sort of the underlying assumption underneath a convergent model of renewal, is looking at, telling, finding, unearthing where the life is in the community. The assumption is that if God put that meeting in that place 20 years ago or 300 years ago, let's start with the assumption that God's not done with that community yet. And let's find out what it is. Maybe it's struggling, maybe it's, maybe it needs some help, but let's find what that is. So that's the gist of it. Let's look at this poem from William Stafford. I think it connects well with what we're going to say. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold on to it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. So, how many of you have heard of Convergent Friends, or heard the word convergent? Okay, so most of you have. A number of years ago, a number of us who were doing mostly blogging online became friends. And one of the things that we started to see was there were evangelicals, there were more conservative-leaning Quakers, there were more liberal-leaning Quakers who were blogging and finding some synergy and connection and building relationships all through the web. And as we built those relationships, we learned, one of the things that we learned was that we had a lot of things in common. That while we may have thought we were really far away, we were asking similar types of questions. And Robin, who's here with us today, coined this term convergent to talk about, to sort of as an umbrella to cover a group of people, a group of Quakers who are interested in both conserving something of the tradition or the thread that you don't let go of, while also in some way being, you might say being relevant or being contextual within whatever setting that you find yourself as a Quaker. And so this word convergent is it's a portmanteau, which is a combination of two words to mean something new. So conservative, emergent, so sort of old and new, tradition, innovation, and to say that what we need to do is hold those two things together. Because often when we have crisis, what we do is we react on two poles. One, we sort of cling to this idea of the good old times, the good old days, and we try to hang on for dear life. Or we throw everything out and okay, nothing works. Let's ditch this place. Let's get out of here, or it's all rubbish. And so convergent is really an attempt to hold these poles together. Now I became a Quaker at Malone University, which is part of the Evangelical Friends tradition, the Gurneyite tradition, not known for being very outspoken Quakers or hanging on to the tradition part of their heritage. And so I began to see that as a young person and say, well, wait a second here, I think there's something about the tradition that still it spoke to me as a 20-year-old, as a 22-year-old. And so I began to wonder why did, at least in that context, why was there less emphasis on the importance of tradition? So maybe in your context, it might be maybe you do a good job of hanging out of the tradition, but you're not really steeped in your particular community or context. Or maybe you're doing both pretty well. The other part of convergent, besides the sort of tradition and innovation, is that there's dialogue among a variety. It emphasizes a dialogue not just among different types of Quakers who have used different language and different experiences for God, for our interaction with what it means to be Quakers, but also dialogue more broadly outside of the community, borrowing good ideas from other folks. So that's sort of just a thumbnail sketch of convergent as we go through. And what I'm hoping to talk to you about in the next the rest of our time together, is how we might go about sort of using some of this idea of convergent within our own meetings, or even just as we think about what it means to be Quaker. So let's see here. I recognize that that tradition, the word tradition can sort of can be a bad word among not just Quakers, but lots of people. So I really like Yaroslav Pelikan's quote, "Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living." And we know the difference between the two of those, right? Arguing over the carpet color is the dead faith of the living. And arguing, and looking for where the life is in a community is the living faith of the dead. It's that thread that gets passed on. And I love the image of a nurse log, because to me a nurse log really sort of captures that sense of something dying and giving birth to something new all at the same time. That sort of ecosystem that our Quaker tradition and our meetings can be really that image, both the tradition and the newness, what's emerging. Okay, so let's see here. So I want to, as we think about what a convergent model of renewal might look like, I want to give you a little background on what I did here. Let me see. Are you okay if I draw a little bit? This might help me.
Sketch. You got a sketch.
It'll be sketching, not really drawing, because really I'm not. You see my pictures; they're pretty rudimentary. But so I spent some time looking at fan culture, participatory culture. Has anybody ever heard of Trekkies, for instance? Okay.
Although they would call themselves trekkers.
Trekkers, absolutely. But yes. When I say trekkers, usually in groups, people think I'm saying it wrong, so it's like, okay. Anyways, okay, so when you think of Trekkies, you think of people who are really disinterested in Star Trek and not invested at all and really bored, right? No, you think of people who are highly invested in their fan object, in understanding not just a character, but probably the entire narrative and all of the sub-narratives that have been created over the years. Or Harry Potter, in Harry Potter's fans. It's the same sort of thing. And one of the interesting things in fan studies is they've looked at how early, and this is a little bit old now, because Harry Potter's still popular, but maybe not quite as much as it was in the early 2000s. But adolescent children would create websites where they would get online and they would write 20 to 30,000 word stories about their favorite, like a backstory of a character. And so they would create fan fiction, and then they would peer review each other. And so this was a way in which, and first teachers struggled with, okay, this, what, you're wasting your time with all this, what are you doing? And then it was like, wait a second here. I can't get my students to write, 100 words in class, let alone 20,000 word stories that are really well developed, and then peer review each other. So there is something about within fan culture where people are really invested in their fan object, and in not just sort of like holding it out here, but actually in some way sort of digesting it and then creating from it, right? So I'm really interested in how, not only how individuals do that, but there are whole communities that surround these stories. And it's like, oh wait, that's a lot like Quakerism. All of you here are Quaker fans, okay? You are spending an entire weekend at a retreat center to talk about Quakerism and to talk about your favorite parts of Quakerism. It's your community, you know the stories, you've probably told the stories to other people. We're talking about ad campaigns, how do we get the word out? Probably many of you have written about your favorite aspects of Quakerism or character. You have created fan fiction. So there's a lot of overlap and connection to this. So I'm interested in sort of learning from culture a way how folks outside of the church or outside of religious communities are taking their texts, are taking their tradition, and carrying it forward in new ways. So one way, and I mentioned this yesterday, one way that we could think about these folks who are writing fan fiction, who are showing up at conferences dressed up and doing cosplay of their favorite characters, is as apprentices. People who have apprenticed themselves to a particular text, to a particular story or stories, who have a certain way of life, and who are really well steeped in that particular tradition. Think of someone who is an incredible jazz musician, right? Who can play and improvise jazz. That wasn't somebody who picked up the horn yesterday, right? That's somebody who knows. They know their instrument. They know all of they know the scales. They know the songs. There's a drummer / DJ named Questlove. Anybody know Questlove?
Yes.
Okay. From the Roots and Jimmy Kimmel Live. Is it Jimmy Kimmel? Is that right? No. Found. There we go. It's hard to keep them all straight. It's hard to keep all the late night white guys straight. But Questlove, I heard him speaking about his love for music, and he said that he has essentially like 20,000 vinyl records, and he knows every track of every record, and he has like hard drives and hard drives and hard drives full of music, and he knows all the beats and all the samples. So these are people who are apprentices. They're not folks who showed up last Sunday and now are ready to run, be the clerk of the meeting. It's the apprentices who, when they become self-aware that there needs to be a change, there needs to be an adaptation within the tradition. They get together, and I think that they do 4 things. At least 4 things. It could be more. Okay, so is this our lecture? All right, so I'm going to draw our apprentices. These are, like I said, these are probably not exactly how Picasso would depict apprentices, but you get the idea. All right, and we'll some longer hair. All right, so what apprentices do is they take the texts, the stories, the practices of their tradition, and they put it in dialogue. Now, this is going to sort of show. Now, this is okay. They put it in dialogue with their cultural context. Okay, so now I'm using a record player because to me that's a record is like the epitome of culture. So you might put something else. So it's our apprentices put in dialogue their texts and their cultural context. So George Fox, Margaret Fell, they take what they understand of Christianity and they apply it to 16th century British context and all of the political turmoil that's going on there. And they see where those things fit, where there's insights, where there's disconnect. And they, out of that dialogue, let me put dialogue there. Out of that dialogue, they do 4 things. They remix. They, I call it the authentic resistance. They participate in authentic resistance. I'll tell you what these means. Okay? They build an open work, or you might call it a decentralized network. This is my network here. Okay, and then what's the last piece? All in order to build an alternative, participatory community. So this is really important. That it's not just about retaining tradition within a new context, but it's actually building participation from the whole group. So what's remix? What's remix? Go ahead and throw it out. Interpreting? Sure. What else?
Translation.
Translation? Okay.
Augmentation.
Augmentation? Okay.
Mashup.
Using mashup?
Mashup, sampling, right? The word remix comes out of hip hop culture and DJ culture of the late 70s and 80s, where DJs were taking samples from records and putting them together. And, oh wow, yeah, it's like it's like you get that beat. Oh, I've heard that before, and there's that sign of recognition. The point of a remix is that you get the reference. Mm-hmm. So remix is really about honoring the reference, or honoring, paying homage to those who came before you, but doing it in a new way, putting it in a new context. What's that?
A face.
Bob Dylan.
Ah, thank you. Okay, this album is called Self-Portrait, right? Okay, first, what is this painting a remix of?
Picasso.
Picasso's.
Self-portrait.
Okay. Dylan didn't make his money on painting. So there's a remix, but this blew me away when I realized this. I'm sure I was the first person to realize this, but those of you who are familiar with this album, what are most of those songs on the album? Who wrote those songs? Dylan, right, to talk about what he believes, to kind of paint a picture of himself, right? No, they're almost all covers. So Dylan's self-portrait is a composite of all of these threads that are being carried through and that have influenced who he is. Okay, so that's remix. So remix goes, of course, all the way back. Book of Ecclesiastes. There's nothing new under the sun. It's just remix. Authentic resistance. I like the image of a hammer because it's tearing down and building up. It's what early friends did when they said, we're going to strip away all the things that become obstacles for us to have an authentic relationship with God. So it's resisting consumerism in favor of production and creation. So what keeps you from creating? What keeps you from what we said earlier about the fans? Getting into the story, all the way down into the story and creating. That's what authentic resistance is. So, DIY culture is an example of authentic resistance. The zine movement of the late 70s and 80s was a way to produce culture that was over and against consumer culture in some way. It gave voice to minority voices. So a lot of women, a lot of disenfranchised folks got into the zine movement and early fan fiction because that was a pocket they could create in. Third, they create an open work. They create a network that is not hierarchical, it's decentralized, it's shared. Think about Wikipedia. When Wikipedia was created, they were borrowing, drawing on the idea of early friends and discernment and consensus building. Then they said, how do we build a platform that does that? So they wanted to create an open work where everyone could come together and create the content as a community. It wasn't like the encyclopedia where one expert explained it. It's where the whole community creates the content together. When we create an open work, what we do is we allow it to be changed and adapted later. I mean, what's a faith in practice? It's like it's an old version of a wiki. It's waiting to be changed by the community, right? So if we're trying to build a participatory movement, it has to be adapted. I forget who was saying about I think it was Emily was saying a culture of yes, a culture of experimentation. It's allowing things to be open. So open source, Wikipedia, critical mass. Anybody ever been a part of a critical mass before? Yeah. The bike protest. They said, we are not blocking traffic, we are traffic. And you never know what the ride is, where the ride is going, or what the quality of the ride is going to be until you get there. And the participants decide where it goes, what it does, what's the theme of that ride. So that's open. Okay, last one. And then I think that these three are all directed to building an alternative participatory community. King's I Have a Dream speech. Painting this picture of what this community looks like. It's the beloved community. It's the kingdom of God is among you. It's gospel order. It's living now the way we want the future to be, right? And so we do these things in service to this. And then eventually we have to start over again, right? And we keep this process going. I want to end with this quote from Vincent Harding, who said this to a group of Quakers from AFSC. I guess this was a couple years ago. The picture is not from a couple years ago, but the quote is, you know something about building a Quaker community, you can see it. The vision that you have is not meant to be kept to yourself. It's meant to be expressed, to trouble some, to push some people, to embrace some people. But for you to keep saying, I see a Quaker community that does not yet exist, and I'm absolutely committed to its coming into being. The easiest way is to say, because it doesn't exist, I'm getting out of here. Remember, we're just going to bail. People will come around and rub your head and say, what's wrong? What you are doing is opening the breath of God and offering to others to see the Quaker community that does not yet exist. What is considered in one generation becomes possible because of the seers or the apprentice. So that's all I got.